But yeah, I do run my own gig in Manchester, and we do a lot of shit, as you just heard. Traditional kind of graphic design kind of stuff, what you'd expect of a kind of contemporary office, I guess, or studio rather, as a lot of people call them. I don't know why, a bit more workman-like to call it an office, but anyway. But I guess as a designer, you know, if I'm known for anything other than swearing, I guess it is self-initiated work, because I do really value it. And it's something that we do genuinely integrate into like how we work. It's, you know, it's not just like fucking vanity projects and shit like that, where it's like I've got an itch to scratch and stuff like that. We actually try and do a lot more with it. And it's not just me either. We try and the people that work with me, the designers, you know, I try and afford them time to sort of explore what they want to do. But I don't sort of see it as just doing design things either. I think it could be whether you start teaching or whether you start writing or whatever. I do see that as a sort of, you know, it's the same means of self-initiating work as a designer. You know, you're still sort of exercising that muscle. And over the years, I've always wrestled with that because, you know, as Hamish said, technically that's not really what you're supposed to do. And a lot of people draw a line in the sand and say, oh, that's for artists, that. You're a designer, you should do what you're told, and you're this middleman, you're this middle person who, you know, gets their message and gives it to those people over there, and what you think doesn't really matter, you know. And I agree with that, to be honest. Because you don't have to like your work for it to actually work, you know, to do its job. What you care about or what your aesthetic tastes are, all that kind of doesn't really matter as long as it does a job that they want. And I've always grappled with that and equally wanted to do my own things. And I found this quote by this French philosopher who I put up because it makes me look smarter than I am. And I've come to sort of realize over the years that actually I don't operate like that. That's just not me. I prefer, and I sort of operate much more like a curator would, really, or an editor, or whatever you want to term them as well. Fucking all those putting people in boxes is one thing. And I see design much more as curating. I'm sort of trying to curate what needs to be done, and what needs to be achieved, and what the ambition is, and finding a way to do that, but also using my own views and my opinions and political and social beliefs to sort of get something out of it myself. And I try and do that in the professional work as well as the self-initiated work. And then I came across somebody else's other clever words that kind of described what I was talking about without the Yorkshire accent. And I think that probably applies to us all sat up here, really, and probably all of you out there, that designers are getting more and more and more increasingly pissed off with sort of just being a service industry. Now, you could say that is because of their ambition. You could say that's because of the vain, you know, and the sick are being pissed on by everyone else, because fashion designers get all loads of acclaim, artists get loads of acclaim, architect gets loads of acclaim, and we're like the runt of the litter, you know, as graphic designers. Nobody gives a shit about our stuff, really, in the wider context of society. So we're trying to use our tools to sort of go out there and find our own audiences, whether that is designers or whether it's a wider thing. And I've sort of really tried to embrace that, really. Culminating mainly in this book, which is on the miners' strike, called In Loving Memory of Work, which I guess is a design book, really, or certainly a book about creativity. But that's the sort of where my input ends on it. And the reason why this is a massive sort of culmination of what I think and how, my belief systems in so many different things, not just about creativity, is because it is so personal to me. I come from a mining background, a town in Barnsley in South Yorkshire. Dad was a miner, granddad was, great-granddad was. And I grew up, the miners' strike, if you're unfamiliar with it, happened in 1984 and ran for a full year. It was this country's longest ever industrial disputes, well, still is. And I was born 10 days after it finished. And I grew up in this sort of post-strike community that was on its arse. And I used to remember all these little stickers everywhere and these posters in Dad's garage and everyone ranting about this thing called the strike and everyone joking that I was a strike baby. You know, my dad was off work. I'm the fruits of his not being at work. You know, he had to do something. I am that. And I think everyone does when they're a kid. And you're growing up, and you sort of feel, because you're in that sort of kid bubble that your mum and dad will dig you out of any piece of shit you get into. You kind of feel that everyone grows up the same way, and everything you go through, everyone else must go through as well. And then as you get older, you realise that's bollocks. You know, everyone has different experiences. And it was at that point that I started to think, oh, maybe this is something different and a bit more unique about my family. Of course it wasn't, because hundreds of thousands of families went through it. But it was only when the 30th anniversary of the strike came up that I thought, actually, I'm gonna do something about this. I really should. You know, mainly because no one celebrates 31 years of fucking anything. So now's the time to do it. And the reason it's personal to me, like I said, is because all my family was involved in this. That's my dad being arrested at Orgreave, which was probably the most seminal social, political thing to come out of the strike, really, apart from one other thing which I'm going to talk about as well, because it was a pretty horrific time in the 80s. I mean, the 80s were fucking rough anyway, but this was particularly rough, where working people were beaten by the police. My dad, for example, was arrested just for picking his mate up off the floor whose head had been cracked open. And he was pulled through police ranks, and he was charged with riot and unlawful assembly, which at that time served a life sentence. He was even charged with having an offensive weapon, which was his house key. And that's the kind of struggle that was going on in this. But this, because it was such a seminal event in our history, you know, some people have referred to it as the most seminal thing that happened to this country, you know, post-war, in terms of the impact it had on everything, the way the country runs. What am I going to say? I don't know. I get a bit fucking wound up by this, but it's really important. I mean, if one thing that important comes out of this, it was this image, which is a horrific image, of Leslie Bolton, who was actually, she was involved in Greenham Common, the women's peace camp, and then because she's from the south of England, and she came north to sort of join Women Against Pit Closures. And she was just photographing there on the day, and someone just by this, I have to get up and demonstrate this like fucking Blue Peter. Just here, sort of on that, there's a bloke lying on the floor, unconscious, and she's shouting over the street to an ambulance to ask for help, when from behind her she hears, "I'll have you too, you bitch," and turns to see this policeman in riot gear on horseback coming to swing at her. Luckily, you can just make it out there-ish. Her friend saw this policeman, and she pulled her out of the way, so he missed. But this image had such a profound effect for many reasons. Like I said, because it is the biggest dispute this country's ever seen and had industrially. You know, there's so much stuff on it about the politics of it. There's so much stuff on it about the history of it and the sort of the effect it had socially in communities and on industry and all that kind of stuff. But there was nothing about it culturally. And this image sort of became a real sort of cultural explosion. People took this, in post-punk Britain, you know, these working class, ordinary, I hate that word to describe anyone, but, you know, for sake of argument, you know, ordinary people who just, under tremendous hardship, took to creativity to sort of express themselves. And they took this image and they used it and they bastardized it and they photocopied it and messed about with it and made all sorts of marks with it and statements and expressed their struggles, because finally it was like, there's the truth, and they wanted to show people and tell people in any means they could other than just talking to them. And it was this that really spurred me on to sort of do this book, because the book is a cultural sort of visual record of that dispute and that time, because it had just been willfully ignored. And I think designers especially can learn from this kind of material, especially the way that it's put together and the spontaneity and the passion that goes into it and the personality. It wasn't all sort of done by, you know, the untrained person, so to speak. Some designers did get involved. This is a designer called Paul Morton, who was from Barnsley. He wasn't a miner, but he knew people obviously living in that town. And he designed this, which is a postcard for Leeds Postcards. And I talk about this quite a lot because, yeah, on the surface level of it, it has that urgency. It looks the way it should look. It's raw, it's powerful, it's from that kind of world. But there are still levels to it, creative levels that this person's been thinking about, and he's trying to express that whole idea of, V for Victory that was, that is heavily owned by the Conservative Party, with Winston Churchill and all that, and he's turning that on its head. So there are informed and intelligent sort of uses of imagination and creativity and intelligence there, and it's worthwhile looking at this stuff. There was the usual kind of graphic kind of plays that all designers love to do, oh look, a visual pun, but still it was all in the aid of the cause, and it goes beyond that.